So I want to kind of round out our exploration of personality type before returning back to human design proper next week. So this week we're going to do one final personality type look. But this one I really do want to bring in what ideas or corollaries or connections we have in human design and kind of do this imaginative exercise where we try to imagine each of the different personalities maybe as the human design types or things like that. So for this, we're going to be doing something called the temperament stack. And this is really kind of like what we looked at last week, where we looked at what our animals were, what our preferred animals, and some of us are more sleep and some are more consume and so on. Some of us, like myself, I have more blast, and then some have play. Well, similarly, there are these temperaments, and we're going to look at the temperamental differences and then kind of try to decouple that from any ideas we might have in human design. Because one thing I've noticed, particularly in Instagram and in some of the debates in human design communities, is that there are people that have certain temperaments where they basically prefer things in the language of that temperament. If you're an intuitive feeler, you might really prefer language that might sound pretty flowery to other types. If you're a sensing thinker, you might really want just the facts and just really keep it simple. And you might really not like a lot of the poetry added to things. And even some of the battles between adherence to human design versus gene keys, I think some of these are typological differences because Ra himself had a personality type and he had a temperament. And in fact, maybe one of the questions we can ask ourselves tonight is what we think his temperament was, because it's an interesting question, because it did imprint the system in his wonderful way of explaining it. And I think he did tend to favor a certain explanatory approach, which is what each temperament does. So okay, so I'm gonna open up the chat window. If you have the chat window available to you, you can look at the chat there. Now, David Kiersey, he had four temperaments, which I'm gonna put these are the Kiersian temperaments, um, first in the chat. So Kiersey. And so he looked at the intuitive feelers and the intuitive thinkers. N here is for intuition rather than I, because I is already reserved for introversion. So it's kind of in this. And then he also looked at people who were sensing, judging, and then sensing, perceiving. So he basically divided the temperaments. He didn't. This is not the way that I divide them. The way that the kind of Jungian temperaments are, two of them are the same, but the other two are different. And these Jungian temperaments are intuitive feeling, intuitive thinking, and sensing feeling. Not necessarily in that order or any order. It's just those four together. And so everybody has, and I'll just write them out actually. So everybody has, we all have these functions. We all have these combinations, these temperaments. So we all have intuitive feeling, sensory thinking and sensory feeling, we could call them. And they're all going to be in a different order depending on what your personality basically subtype is. And that's what's interesting also is that this is what really blew me away about the objective personality system. When I learned about the animals, the first thing I thought is, well, that would also mean that the temperaments are in an order. And it's something I'd already been kind of playing with at that time because I'd been thinking, how can we get to a subtyping of the fundamental Jungian types? And I was going into subtypes based on, so like for the intuitive, there'd be a thinking intuitive, there'd be a feeling, or there'd be a sensing intuitive, there'd be a double intuitive, and so on. And I was kind of doing that. And I was in that area. And so when I learned about objective personality, this was back in 2017. This was the breakthrough for me when I started to really develop what I call the animal stack, or sorry, the temperament stack from their animal stack. And so my temperament stack, I'll just show you. I'll type it in here, Jonah's temperament stack, because they basically said, look, you can have these animals in this certain order. I started looking at my animals and so on. I was like, that also means that I have the temperaments in that order. So my dominant is NF, second is NT, third is SF, and four is ST. And so that would be that would be kind of written like this. And basically what that's saying is my predominant mode that I want to engage with the world is through intuitive feeling. My secondary mode is through intuitive thinking. Now, already just those two should tell you that I have a very hard time in the sensory world. There's a real division of labor idea where the kinds of things I'm going to want to do, like I love working on computer programming software architecture challenges. Why? Because I use so much intuition, I use so much thinking. But it's also not fully satisfying to me because I need intuitive feeling also. Feeling is more aesthetics, art, entertainment, um, even spirituality, things that don't fit into just like logistical engineering challenges and things of that nature. So the thing is, when we kind of are able to see the temperaments as different from the human design body graph, then we can see that, okay, some people are going to have like different temperaments are going to have different approaches to human design. Some people are going to need different things from it. And it doesn't even have to do with what the needs of their body graph are. Like you can already look in the body graph and see, okay, this is a very logical person. This person or this one person has a defined ego. You can see certain conclusions about maybe what somebody's going to need when they come into human design. They're going to kind of they're going to want to test it out in this way or that way, or they're going to need this kind of information or that kind of information. Well, similarly, each of these temperament stacks, basically for me, I'm always attuned to the intuitive feeling and the intuitive thinking. I'm not much attuned to the sensory, but when I do attune to the sensory, it's through sensory feeling. And there are actually nicknames for each of these given by the founders of Objective Personality, Dave Powers and Shannon Renee. And so these are the objective personality nicknames of the temperaments. And I wish I had better names. I guess Kiersey gave nicknames to some of them. So NF was hippie. Kiersey calls them idealists. Intuitive thinkers they call them nerds. So I'm a hippie nerd according to this system, which is really again their nicknames. But they're also called rationalists. And then the sensing feeling are called popular, and sensing thinking are called reporters. So their nicknames don't really they're not as charged. But basically I just put those in the chat there. And so this is my order of preferences. I was just having a conversation with James Alexander and some other friends about objective personality, like Johnny, who was here last week with us. And both Johnny and James have sensing feeling last. So sensory feeling is their least preferred. And so I think what's really interesting here is to see what you find most distasteful. Like, what do you have the most disinterest in? And that's going to tell you something interesting. In their case, they have the most disinterest in SF, sensory feeling, which is popular things. So they don't really like necessarily popular music. They're not really connected to the mainstream culture as much. I have more connection to that. It's third for me. So, yes, I have intuitive feeling, intuitive thinking. Most of my life is spent in the world of intuition. But then I go into the sensory and I really connect to popular mass media experiences. Like I'm kind of excited to go out and see the new Dune 2 movie, and I'm kind of connected to the popular culture a little bit in that way. What I have last, what is fourth for me, is the sensory thinking, and that's a reporter. So if my job was to report on things, I might find that a little bit, well, it would be fascinating because the thing that we're kind of least developed at is always interesting to us, maybe, but it would also get boring in certain ways. So, okay, so now I would open up the question, and if no obligation whatsoever, but Ricky, Lisita, if either of you would like to, with no obligation, but if you would like to take a guess at your own first temperament or all of your temperaments, the whole stack, either way, or you could also start from the bottom up. And if you don't want to share, if you like to keep this to yourself or just kind of have this as something to contemplate later, that's totally fine as well. I'm happy to talk about more of the nuances here.
It might be, could you give, like, you gave the examples of like the pop culture, you gave some concrete examples in the world. If you gave more examples of each type, I think that would
Exactly.
help.
Sure. Absolutely. So intuitive feeling, they nickname it hippie, which is just like they're kind of like little, I mean, they're very jokey people, Shan and Dave. So they're, oh, wonderful. Well, we have Marissa, who is an adept at this system. So we're doing objective personality again. We're going to go back to human design topics next week with some cool substructure stuff, but we're still in objective personality land. And I was just going over the temperament nicknames, and then I was saying also, how they're, yeah, like as you were saying, actually, the nicknames, they haven't really used these for a while. You mentioned that last week, and these are kind of, this is some of their earlier research, but I think they're still meaningful. Like hippie as a nickname, I mean, Dave himself doesn't really seem like a hippie. He's lead NF. I'm lead NF. I might kind of seem like a hippie, but I don't know what a hippie really is. The nickname of that, I think, is just because intuitive feeling are idealists who love human the human spirit and kind of see the human potential and all of these things, which makes them called idealists by Kiersey. And so if you look at Kiersey and idealists, I should have grabbed them, but I have some personality books that we could actually look through just to see how they describe intuitive feelers. But people like Martin Luther King Jr. are usually considered intuitive feelers, or like Oprah Winfrey is considered an intuitive feeler example because she fills people with hope for a brighter future. And it's kind of the combination. If we get really technical about what it is, the intuition is basically the way of perceiving the world that is looking for drawing connections between things and filling in blanks and making jumps and conclusion, like jumps and assumptions and things like that, versus the sensory types, which tend to be more nuts and bolts and kind of grounded in the physical reality of, just like you find a lot more like mechanical engineers versus software engineers. You find intuitive thinkers as software engineers. Sensing thinkers tend to be more mechanical engineers and auto engineers, and stuff like that. Like they're actually on the sensory side. So the way Jung described it, if we get to a technical description, is that the sensory is taking in data as it comes, either the introverted sensing, which is a very sensitive way of kind of like a finely tuned photographic plate of taking in data in a very sensitive way, or the extroverted sensing, which is kind of merging with the outer reality and taking in data in a holistic way, from having basically being experiencing the present moment in its fullness. And either way, that the sensing is taking in data as very concrete facts. And what an intuition is doing is going in two directions. It's either taking a whole bunch of these facts, too many for the sensory type to really account for at once, and it's trying to extrapolate meanings from them and kind of narrow them down to like what we can conclude, what conclusions can we draw, what assumptions can we make from this, things like that, or how do we feel about it if it's connected to feeling. Or it's going the other direction, and it's basically going from the one to the many and kind of trying to brainstorm. So the intuition is always going to be like brainstorming new ideas or narrowing down. Either way, when it's connected to feeling, I would say the reason they call it hippie and the reason it's idealist is because it's like envisioning other ways the future could be that would be more humanist. The feeling function is the really humanistic function. If you look at James Hillman's essay on the feeling function, he really describes it as the special case function, where every single case is a special case. So it's very human. So you have to treat every case as unique. You can't just make up a rule about it. So you find thinking types like Kant, the philosopher, was a thinking type who came up with this basically law because he was trying to figure out what was ethical. And in his law, he says, even if, like, say everybody is making too much food, so you don't work and you just eat the food. Well, that's unethical, because then if everybody stopped working and only ate the food, there wouldn't be enough food. So even though if everyone works, the food goes to waste, it's still ethical. Basically, you can look at philosophers doing that as an attempt of a thinking type to eliminate the need to ever use their feeling function. And it ultimately fails, because the feeling function is going to always be there to say each and every person you meet, each and every moment of your life, each and every human interaction you have with somebody, you have a way that you conduct yourself with them that is adapted to the special case of that unique life situation. You cannot make a law about it. In fact, we do make laws about it, but it's up to the judge to employ their feeling function to pass a judgment that feels heavy or feels light. So even though two people may break the same law, because of different circumstances, one is trying to feed their kids and they're a starving single mother. It's a different situation than someone robbing out of selfish gain or who knows what, right? Like you have totally different situations, and each unique situation calls for a different feeling judgment to be passed on it. So, feeling is really the axiological function, which is a fancy term from philosophy that just means aesthetics and ethics. And it's there to basically say what we like and dislike. Like we don't like unethical people. We don't like, unesthetic things. And when you have a really developed feeling function, that's very important to you, more important to you than the utilitarian thinking concerns of does it work or is it reasonable or is there a reason for all of this and so on. So thinking is more concerned with reasons, feeling is more concerned with likes and dislikes, and when you're in the intuitive feeling realm, it's kind of, do we like reality as it is? Could we imagine a different future we might like better? Could we imagine a more humane future, a more ethical future? Could we imagine a better future? And that's why it tends to be yeah, more on the intuitive forecasting of kind of what the future could be. Whereas the sensory types are more oriented to the past and the present, because extroverted sensing is very present oriented and introverted sensing is very past oriented. So already we have some similarities with human design, where in human design we have like the past oriented abstract circuitry or the present oriented, especially integration gate 20, but also individual. And then we have the future oriented logical circuitry. So there are some levels where the human design past present future dichotomy also plays out, like the past present future dichotomy of the different Jungian functions. So that, but at the same time, we have to understand that this is a repetition. um so yeah. Oh, and I see your post there, Lasita. The good thing is Marissa probably knows more about this than me because she's been following objective personality very closely for about 7 years now, and I would love to have her share, comment, correct anything. So your stack, Ricky, intuitive, feeler, dominant. Yeah. So right. So seeing the potential for a different future. So you could be like an ENFJ or so yeah, and right. And we'll do a quick recap, Rachel. Don't worry about being late at all. This is a very casual. This is a start kind of Monday night. Okay, right. So being ENFJ, great. And I was saying, Ricky may as well. So what we now know, with the subtypes from the objective personality system, is that each of these temperaments actually has more types they could possibly be than we realized because of subtypes. So basically, the NF temperament traditionally is these four Myers-Briggs types, traditionally. But now we know that they can actually be, we actually have other types that they can possibly be. So we know that, let me see, let me get them right here. Uh, these are the other possible lead in F. Yeah, is that right? Yeah, these can all be, oh no, wait, I missed one. Sorry, I missed one. Which one did I miss? ISFP. I missed ISFP. Okay, so now we know that really half of the Myers-Briggs types, literally half of the Myers-Briggs types can be lead NF. So it's kind of like blown the whole thing wide open in the past 7 years with the work on objective personality. And I definitely don't want to go too far here for those who haven't been in this world, but basically Jung had his four function model, and from there we then went to eight functions. Then Myers Briggs had 16 types, and then objective personality has blown the whole thing wide open by showing that actually, with these animal stacks, like we looked at last week, there are so many subtypes that really what we've all suspected is true. We've all kind of suspected that the 16 Myers Briggs types don't really have a chance to describe the vast difference of human behavior. And how can you describe people that are so differently with the same 4-letter code. It's like, especially coming from human design where we have so much detail, or even coming from astrology, you're going to something where you just have, whether 16 types. Come on, that doesn't really seem very um, now, and I'll get to this question in a moment. But what they found is actually no, there are more than 16 meaningful types, of course, and actually you can get meaningfully up to 512. Or I think they're actually now with their social typing at over 2,000. But it's not really that these are even subtypes as much as they're just parallel trackable categories, and the parallel trackable categories kind of are like, some of them have degrees of independence. Some of them are fully independent, like every possible combination is possible. Some of them are restricted or limited in a certain way, so there's only certain possible combinations. But in any case, the lead temperament, it turns out that half of the Myers-Briggs personality types can be lead NF. So you can be an ESFJ, you can lead NF. You just have to be lead play, because then you have extrovert feeling with extrovert intuition. You can be an ENTP and be lead NF. You just have to be, and so on. And I'm an INTJ and lead NF, but I have lead sleep. So it's like the different types that you wouldn't expect to be intuitive feeling types can still be intuitive feeling in certain animal combinations or versions. Now that was really blowing me away, because I have good friends who are very different types. For instance, I'm an INTJ. I have a friend who's an ESFJ. Seemingly nothing in common, very little in common, just the J, right? But when you look at the cognitive functions, they're extremely different types. Well, it turns out we have the exact same temperament stack. We're both intuitive feelers first, so we're deep humanists, deeply committed to humanist values, helping humanity, having good conduct with other humans, treating people like human first. Then we have NT, the intuitive thinking. We're both very interested in computer programming and abstract logic and all sorts of theoretical, philosophical, intuitive thinking, nerdy kind of rationalist things. Actually, we don't have the exact same stack. He's ST and then SF. I'm SFST. But this fundamental combination of NFFT or NFNT, I found again and again and again. So I found that with so many different friends, I would find a lead consume INFP. Well, they're lead NF. And then I would look at each of their functions, and they would basically have it was a whole layer of personality that showed me that I really did cluster together with other NF people. And then when we had ST people, they were kind of the odd ones out. And it's not that we really had a problem. I mean, a good example is the artist Von Paul. He's lead ST, missing NF. So he and I are complete polarities. And yet we're close friends. It works because there's a division of labor. And what they actually found is when you find a clustering of the same cognitive function, this was researched by Dario Nardi, the pentas were not able to, I mean, he didn't use that term, but the groups were not able to compete as effectively as when you had a diverse group of different personalities. So actually, when you have different temperaments, it's probably the same. At the same time, different temperaments can have very different value systems. So, Ricky, you and I can probably connect very easily because our temperament stack is only off by SFST. The big difference would be I'd be playing a new Drake song and you'd be like, I don't care about this new pop culture thing. So you have the exact same temperament stack as one of my best friends, Johnny. And he is missing SF, very out of touch with what's popular, what's going on in the world, because he just doesn't care about popular culture. He thinks it's very dumb in a way. And in a way it is, because SF is the most opposite from NT, so what's conventionally seen as intelligent. But there is an intelligence to SF as well. The intelligence to SF is kind of the intelligence of how to appear. It's the intelligence of appearances, and it's the intelligence of popularity and of things like that. So it's a totally different world. So Rachel, if you then, and I will answer your question in a moment here. So you're probably missing SF then if you say Drake is bullshit. Yeah. So, but see, Mike, for instance, has SF secondary. He's NF SF. So Mike goes a completely different direction with it. Mike goes NF SF, and then he goes NT, and he's so the one you're missing, I'm putting in parentheses because it's the one that you have the biggest problem with, or just the one that you like the least. So Mike and I are very common. We have this a lot in common. We're both intuitive feelers. He's an INFP, I'm an INTJ. He's lead consume, I'm lead sleep. And basically, and I have blast, and he secondary blast, and he has secondary sleep, and there's these things. But when you look at it from the temperament stack, you see that he and I are both deeply committed humanists, but I go the direction of intuitive thinking from that. I go the direction of basically, I've spent a lot of time in philosophy and computer programming and really geeky intuitive thinking worlds. And he dabbles in that. That's his hobby. It's third for him. It's not the least for him. Oh, that's funny. Intuitive feelers do have certain looks to them or a certain range of look. We have other commonalities. Our Enneagrams have certain similarities. He's nine wing one, I'm a one wing nine. We both have four in our Enneatype, in our tri type. And I think he has seven wing six and I have six wing seven in tri type. So we have a lot of similarities. But oh, we look the same. Yeah, based on this, not real life. Okay, well, but also, yeah, but our enneagrams are similar too. We have some complementary things. Now, the thing is that doesn't mean we would be more successful on a team trying to solve problems because what Dario and Artie found was actually a diverse set of cognitive functions are needed, and too polarized, you can kind of have problems. Like we would maybe both. Yeah, we would both have the same, like we wouldn't have enough division of labor. We would both have the same lack of ST and then be blaming each other for it. At the same time, we could both potentially grow from that. So it's not saying, yeah, that it would be any decided in one way or another. But yeah, so just to kind of think about now, if you might want to think of your own cognitive or your own temperament stack, and also Lucida, if you're interested, you're more than welcome. And then Marissa, I know you've told me before, but if it's convenient for you to type into the chat, you could share yours. It's not necessary if not. I also see you had a question, Rachel, about the Enneagram and the four temperaments, right? Sanguine, melancholy, choleric, and phlegmatic. Yeah, that I mean, on the one hand, James Hillman, he has this great. So it's actually in his feeling function essay, I believe, where he says we should be careful not to collapse all fours into the same thing. Like you can kind of do what James Joyce did and say, oh, the four directions, the four cardinal directions are related to the four seasons, are related to the four suits, are related to the four, to the four, the four. And what Hillman says is no, he says all the fours are different. I mean, they're different fours, they're different sets. Like there's no need to collapse the pattern into some grandiose thing. I would actually say it's introverted intuition that collapses it, and that since he was, I believe, an introverted intuitive himself, that he was a little bit like fighting against his own tendency to see them all as the same thing. But I mean, if it's helpful to see it, we can definitely see the foundations of Jung's four function model going back to the ancients who had the four temperaments, and Jung himself commented on that, as well as commenting that the symbol of wholeness is the circle basically with a cross in it, or so either the circle or the cross can be really symbols of wholeness, and that psychologically, the fact we have these four functions, four primary ways of doing things, it kind of orients us in a way that there's one that we're never really that good at. It's basically, you can imagine the psyche as a circle, and then our personality comes into that and sort of orients it and kind of pulls it and stretches it into an arrow. But the direction of the arrow has an opposite direction that it's going to have problems with. And so it's the same with our temperaments. My polarity is pulling me in the direction of intuitive feeling. And so I have a lot of sensory thinking problems. I have a bookkeeper who is a lead blast ISTJ. So her dominant temperament is sensory thinking. She's so good at the bookkeeping stuff, and she's so good at telling me all the stuff that I wouldn't really notice because it's not the kind of thing I'm even thinking about. Same with Von Paul. He's an ISTP lead consume, and his dominant temperament is sensory thinking. So sensing and thinking. So he's always seeing the world in a very nuts and bolts, well thought out observation kind of sensory thinking way. And then his least preferred is intuitive feeling. Interestingly, Bob Dylan was another sensory thinker or maybe sensory feeler. but I believe it was sort of surprising to me that he was missing intuitive feeling. And so people kind of see Bob Dylan as part of this like hippie revolution. But if you talk to him, he was not really interested in the love and light, intuitive feeling revolution of the new era. It's also interesting that we see the rise of intuitive feeling as playing into the larger global scale narrative of the development of the solar plexus, feeling awareness, the mutation in the solar plexus, and all of this. Yeah, Vaughn is great. So that's right. ENTJ, same as Shan. Thank you so much for doing that. So the temperament stack is ST. Right, STSF, NF, and NT. And so you get some really interesting stacks. Like Marissa's stack is really interesting because the sensing thinking is polarized from the intuitive thinking. And that's like such a weird polarity to have. It's almost if you were to be a writer and you wanted to kind of write about what some of the fundamental goads of humanity were, like that's actually a word that Ra uses when he talks about like the fundamental problems of humanity. There are these polarities that are kind of built in, like the problem of thinking versus feeling, and you have philosophers grappling with it and so on. Well, we can get even more specific, where Marissa has fundamentally built into her psyche the orientation of the difficulty or challenge between how do you reconcile sensory thinking with intuitive thinking. So that's like such a specific little type. I mean, that's what I love. That's the magic of the objective personality system is that Jung noticed the polarities of the dominant to the inferior function. So he noticed whatever your dominant function is, you're going to have some sort of difficulty with the inferior and some sort of challenge to do something with the inferior function. Well, what we now have with objective personality are these very minuscule subtypes where we actually see, like, if you were a writer, how would you write the story of the difficulty between sensing thinking and intuitive thinking? It would almost be like the old school mechanical nuts and bolts, like trains and stuff like that, giving way to like Wi-Fi and invisible computer programming and like intuitive thinking. Like basically, it would be almost like steampunk being replaced by or something like that, right? Or the battle between the two. And then the high tech world breaks down, and the post apocalyptic steampunk world, which is the sensory thinking world, becomes more important again. And there's like a battle between the two kinds of thinking. Like, what should thinking be used for? Should it be used to build sensory things and to be oriented in the sensory world? Should it be used for engineering projects? Should it be used for things that don't rely on vastly complicated algorithms in the cloud? Like, should we build, I've seen sensing thinking. These are inventors that are like looking at like power problems and how do we procure enough lithium and how do we convert lithium from the seawater and like sensing thinking problems. Now there are intuitive thinkers who are doing things in that as well, but the intuitive thinkers are going to be, they tend not to be as interested in the sensory issues. Like they tend to be more, you'll find a lot of intuitive thinkers are just like debating about philosophy or about meaning or about, I mean, who knows what? I mean, so much. There's a different range where the sensing thinking types are working on a lot of logistical problems in the real world. Like we have mass shipping problems, and how do we organize all this? And then the intuitive thinkers are kind of working in a different domain. They're working in like the domain of the methodology that should be employed to even approach solving that kind of problem or something like that, right? You find a lot of INTPs doing that and things like that. So yeah, because I have a micro version of that in my own stack because it's the opposite. I prefer the NT and I just prefer the ST. And so for me, it's much more comfortable for me to use my thinking and apply my thinking to solving problems on the computer than it is to solving problems in my car. But I can figure out the car problems. I just often, it's like harder for me to figure out real world issues or even real world logistical things. The ST is just so foreign for me that I'm often missing all sorts of important details, or I kind of need to like offload it, or I need to go really slow or go over it again and again, stuff like that. So, yeah, and oh, wonderful. We have Ashley joining. So, yeah, so we're basically looking at our temperament preferences. So, the first thing I guess is that this really opens up our assumptions about how somebody would would live out a certain body graph. Because you look at a body graph and you see that channel, and you might just have an assumption because you know someone with that channel. Well, that person could have been play, and they could have been sensing thinking, and this person is sleep and they're intuitive feeling. So I was actually having this conversation with James Alexander earlier, where he was saying this is really helpful because he's a sleep blast person, and Johnny is a consume play person, yet both have defined head and ajna. And he was kind of wondering how that works because he's like, for him, his defined head and ajna is so internal, and he spends so much time sleeping and then, like me, blasting, that he was like, he had thought that that was just a head ajna thing, that people who have defined head ajna have a lot going on internally and so on. And I said, well, Johnny has defined head ajna, but he's play and consume. So he's very much attuned to the outer world. And it's like, well, how does that work? Well, he's thinking, he's curious about things in the outer world. He walks into a room, he's like a cat. He opens every drawer, he opens every little James isn't opening dishes to see what's underneath or something the way Johnny is, but he has a defined head ajna that wants to solve and know, and he's curious and he's being propelled to learn and all of these things. So it's like the same body graph or the same kind of activation can have a very different expression with, as we saw last week, the play consumes versus the sleep blasts and the other combinations. Well, similarly, it can be very different when we come to temperament. Now, in the example earlier, James is NT/NF and Johnny is NF/NT. And I'm NF/NT. And there's a lot of NF/NT people around us because we all kind of speak the same language, a very humanist, but also rationalist language. It's like we're the humanist rationalists, you could call us in a way, or idealist rationalists. But then when I talk to Von Paul, he is a reporter and he will just tell me, and he does report. He tells me all the things he sees and the birds and everything happening and all of these sensory details that I would actually usually miss because I'm off in my head imagining something or envisioning something or right. So yeah, so it's interesting when we see opposites. So and then for you, Rachel, are you saying that Marissa's stack is opposite for you? That you're an NT/NF? Is that what you were commenting, or was that or the opposite when I was talking about Vaughn, maybe? But yeah, so and then Ashley, if you're interested, we're kind of playing the game of trying to figure out what our temperament stacks are. I already am pretty clear on mine, but oh yeah, yes, opposite Vaughn. So basically we all have a most preferred temperament and then a secondary, and then our third is kind of our hobby temperament, something that we like to practice, but we don't really do all the time. And then the fourth is the one that can really cause issues, but also have a lot of rewards if we finally do go into it. It's probably like the one we should do one day a week because we can't really do it every day. It would be exhausting to us. We're not really made to do that. We're not oriented to that. At the same time, it's the one that connects us most to the unconscious, and so in some sense, most to the design. So just like the inferior function, which is the what Jung found connects us to the unconscious, the fourth temperament is sort of imbued with some magic. So for me, my fourth temperament is sensing thinking. It would be terribly boring for me to have a job that required me to use that all day. At the same time, the sensory world and the world of how the world works, that sensing thinking world, is kind of fascinating to me. And I do see a magic in it. There's always a little, the thing we're really good at is really mundane to us. So the intuitive feeling world is kind of mundane to me. It's not such a magical thing to me, but but the sensing thinking world is. All right, so let's see if there's any interesting connections we can find to human design. So I guess one is that when Jung developed his four function model, he does really develop it in a way that talks about the movement towards intuition and in a way towards feeling. He didn't develop this as much as James Hillman. James Hillman in his feeling function really talks a lot about the burgeoning differentiation of feeling as a function collectively, which sounds an awful lot like when Ra talks about the differentiation of the solar plexus and the development of the mutations therein. So for James Hillman, his idea is really that the feeling function has mostly been given short shrift, that even Jung himself didn't really give it enough credence. And he would kind of have a preference for really intuitive thinking, because intuitive thinking can be such a dominant paradigm of, in a way, making itself the superior paradigm for discussing anything through intellectual concepts. But Hillman felt that images were always more precise than words, and that the conceptual word virus would kind of take over people, all these college professors and so on, who would kind of rely too much on the words and not enough on the images. And a big part of that was the supremacy of thinking, or supremacism of thinking over feeling. That feeling was eliminated or was rejected as merely being emotional, when actually the feeling function is the cognitive function. And this is very much in line with what Jung said, that develops and elaborates feelings and kind of processes them. And it's not just about being emotional. It's not that feeling types are more emotional than other types or anything like that. That actually that feeling types can be very cold, because they might be able to use their very well developed feeling function to hold their feelings in check sometimes, for instance. So, yeah, so I'm a lead intuitive feeler, but my Myers-Briggs is not it's actually the INTJ. So I'm a subtype of a much more rationalist intuitive thinker, or what's more commonly caricatured as intuitive thinker. And I would imagine that people would see me more as an intuitive thinker, because the other thing you can do is basically combine this with our work from last week to get the full picture. And this might be a little bit advanced, but at the same time, this is just the full picture, and it's not that advanced. I mean, there are ways we can interpret this. And I'm just going to show, as an example. This is me and Mike, who I've known for about 12 years now, and we really are very close friends. And both of us have lead NF. And actually, we've known Johnny that whole time too. We've all met at the same time. Johnny, who was with me last week, and he has so just like, how funny is this? Let me just write out his. 1 second here. uh, that's it. There we go. And that one's hard to see, is because it's missing. Okay, so each of us are very different types and very different animal stacks, and yet we're all lead NF. And Mike is the lead consume, so he likes to ask the most questions and absorb the most. I'm the lead sleep, so I like think really deeply about things and go into my inner state. Mike is quad left, actually, PLL, as is Johnny. Yeah. And oh, you're not seeing me as lead sleep? Well, you can't see sleep. It's invisible because it's double introverted, so you never see it. Sleep is like spacing out and disconnecting from the outer world. And oh, I'm not seeing my screen. Right, I've been typing these into the chat. I don't know. That's all it is. It's just the chat. I just was typing. It was this thing. Yeah, I basically wanted to compare these. Yeah, here we go. I'm gonna make it a little better. I wanted to just fixing that. There we go. I just wanted to compare those three. So these are like three friends, me and two of my friends, who have been friends for, over 10 years. And we're different animals, but all those animals are NF. And then Johnny and me go more into computer programming and things like that, because we have the NT. Mike goes more into the SF, where Johnny's not as interested. So Mike keeps me up to date on what's popular, what's going on, what's interesting in pop culture these days, like what are people listening to. So the difference between sleep and consume. So let's just do a little example here. So Mike is NF consume. This is okay. And then that's me. Okay, yeah, 1 second here. Okay. So Mike's NF consume is introverted feeling with extroverted intuition. My NF sleep is introverted intuition with introverted feeling. So the difference is the sleep is double disconnected. It's like distant. It's double introverted. So consume people are actually very present. They're passive and present. And sleep is like passive and distant. You can think of blast as active and distant, and play as active and present. So play people are like very present with you and active with you and kind of taking actions and poking you, and they're very present, but their play is just kind of banter. Consume people are very present with you, but they're asking you questions and they're asking you how you feel about it. They're keeping you talking. Sleep people like me are very distant with you and struggling to stay present. And so if I'm in a conversation, I'm always going off into my head and kind of going into my inner encyclopedia. And then blast people also have a hard time staying present with people. They tend to be very distant. And so I'm sleep blast. So I'm kind of like double distant in that way. Uh, so I have some difficulty staying present with people, but I love when it's very rewarding to me when I do stay present. That's what's so funny. Someone like Mike, who's lead consume, doesn't feel the same reward from having had that present time with people. He gets that same reward from doing something that is lower in his stack. So it's kind of like the lower it is, the more of a stretch it is for us, the more rewarding it is when we finally do it. But we don't want to do it every day because that would just exhaust us. So really, for me, it's about once a week, and that was kind of what Jung said. It's like have your one day a week that you give to the thing that you don't normally do. So whatever it is that you don't normally do. So for me, it's my ST. So one day a week, do all my bookkeeping and taxes and all of my sensory thinking, like nuts and bolts, like, and also like work in the garden and dig things and but it has to take some skill. Like I can't just be like digging. It has to be, oh, actually digging does take some skill, but actually like learn how to do it right and not just, you know, slow down and take your time with it. And that's a lot of times what we're not willing to do, is to really slow down and go into that. And I mean, this is something that I think a lot of what human design did, at least for me, is I didn't have to think about any of this stuff because my sacral would start to respond to things that I didn't know before that I had any interest in. And it would naturally take me into those dispreferred places because it's my design talking to me. It's my own body. It's my unconscious. It's communicating with me. So it was taking me to those same places. So I actually see human design as a real shortcut where there's people that are learning Jungian psychology, and I don't want to diminish that. I have some brilliant friends who are into Jungian typology and psychology and all of this, but a lot of them are trying to like do dream journaling and things like that to get in touch with their unconscious, when actually, if you're following strategy and authority, that is your unconscious speaking to you and your higher self, if you will. It is your sub and super conscious. It is basically there is some way that you are being guided through to make the right decisions. I mean, that's what it really comes down to. And I think a lot of people in personality typology are still, they're getting inklings of it because they've at least oriented themselves. They're at least pointed the right direction. They're pointed the right direction. They're going, my whole life, I have ignored this part of my life. Now I'm paying attention to it. Well, guess what? It's going to tell you a lot of things. Your unconscious will tell you a lot of things that are really good for you. And similar to following your strategy and authority, right? If you have emotional definition, it's going to tell you a lot of things that will bring clarity for you if you finally slow down and listen to it. If you're sacrally defined, it's going to tell you what you really like, even if you wish you didn't like it, even if you pretend you don't like it, or even if you pretend you do, it's going to tell you you're sick of that job, or, it's basically going to be honest with you. And that's what we get in human design with strategy and authority. Well, that's what the unconscious brings you. um, Ashley's inferior SF, well, that would be according to your Myers Briggs type. However, there are different possibilities. It actually could be any of the four temperaments because of the way the temperament stack works, that your missing temperament could be any of the four. That being said, so for those who don't know, Ashley, she doesn't really like, you don't like a lot of like meaningless small talk. You like human design small talk, but it's never really small talk because it's like interesting things, and you don't really mind like talking with people. But if it's getting stuck at like a family gathering kind of during the holidays for hours on end, yeah, I think that people missing SF might also might have a hard time with that. I mean, to a degree, it's hard to really say. It's hard to generalize in that way because it could also be very rewarding for them, even more than for other people. Like they might just be like deeply touched by Christmas in a way that like a lead SF person might be a little bit cynical about it. Because again, our dominant, the closer to consciousness it is, it's like the more the personality and the mind kind of get their fingers in it, and it just becomes cynical and jaded and passe and blase and all of that. It just becomes like old hat. It becomes a completely normal normal thing. So that's what's so funny about it is when you really learn the different types and the different stacks and so on, you're kind of like, okay, this thing that I do, totally normal to me, somebody else is like blown away by that. But right. And then I'm like really impressed by something and they for them it's just nothing. It's something that they just do every day. So yeah, so Ashley in her Myers-Briggs is an INTP. So she would typically, so she would either be a lead sensing thinker or a lead intuitive thinker. So if you were an intuitive thinker, she could be in like NT, NF, SF, and then missing ST or something like that. But but yeah, that right, the sensing world being more magical. Absolutely. I mean, you could be missing ST. I mean, that would be a very real possibility. You always have to cross-reference this with what the animal would be for an INTP. So their ST is sleep. So I don't see you as a missing sleep person. I think you're missing blast. So being an INTP, that would be missing SF. So Ashley would be missing SF, which would be basically disliking popular culture. Or that's one of the ways it would kind of express itself. See, the cross-referencing I did was between what we looked at last week plus this week. So INTP cognitive, it's kind of a little bit technical, but the stack is I'm going to write it out like this. And so basically, because that's her stack, that we know then that if she is missing blast, because I think she's probably consume, sleep, play, blast, something like that, or consume, you know, probably something like that. Then in that case, then that blast is SF. The blast is SF. Anyway, there's a whole math behind it. I won't go into that because, again, we're here for human design. I mean, this is a human design series. We're going to go back fully to human design next week. The reason I'm going into this is so we can kind of eliminate our biases that that person has 35, 36. That must mean that they have a personality like this. Well, actually, there's a huge variety of personalities. Some people just want to watch life go by. Others want to really take charge. Some are really wanting to, and there's different ways to do that, even with the very much the same design and the same channels. And so that's why it was interesting looking at examples of like Johnny being consume play, James being sleep blast or blast sleep rather, and I guess Johnny's play consume. But having those polarities, that dichotomy, and then going, okay, wow, they can actually both have defined head ajna and both be really propelled by a life force energy that makes them think deeply about things and try to solve things and try to figure things out. And yet their personalities are so different. Their personalities are so different. And they have opposite missing animals. So James is missing consume, so his nightmare is getting stuck being forced to listen to people. Johnny is missing blast, so his nightmare is getting stuck on stage being forced to talk to people and explain things, right? And so it's kind of like they have these opposite and I'm being a bit facetious with this, but yeah. So Rachel, we started last week, and I guess I might not have uploaded it yet, but it should be up. I'm also doing an advanced Jungian typology series for Signpost that I'll be releasing very soon. That's just kind of some things I've been, recording. And obviously, we're going to do mostly human design content, but this is just something that I've studied deeply. We have a few other members who know, like Marissa is pretty deep into it, and also Johnny has been a member this whole time. I was really impressed. He was showing me some of the videos. I'm like, you've been a member this whole time. He's really stuck with it for about 7 years over 7 years now. So, or just about that, because that they started in 2017. So anyway, it's an exciting system, but I know that we're obviously all here for human design. So I just like to put it in the context of this is to help you see what the personality really is and how fickle these personalities can be. And if you're not following strategy and authority, how biased the personality will be to just do what it likes and never want to slow down and do what it doesn't like. Because anytime you go into the less preferred ways of being, it requires tremendously slowing down. See, I can do these sessions and be in my intuition and my thinking and my blast and kind of I can do this and I have to keep a certain speed going. I don't mind slowing down with people in conversation, but it's harder to do if my job is to kind of present a topic or present information, also because my blast is pretty quick. So I'm naturally going to kind of go at a certain pace. That being said, okay, well, so being blast last, Marissa, that would make you a great interviewer. Jimmy Fallon is blast last. Johnny's blast last. You wouldn't believe the YouTube comments I get on my interviews about saying what a poor interviewer I am. And I have to laugh. I don't take them personally because it's true. I interviewed Chetan Parkin the other day, and I didn't really ask him any questions. I mean, I would just say, well, that's really interesting. Have you ever thought about this? And what about this? And then he would say something, and I didn't like get him to elaborate his thoughts. Now, I thought it was a great interview, and I left that interview going, wow, that was really amazing. And I got some comments that people really enjoyed it. At the same time, I'm naturally, unless I really slow down, and so I could have been much slower. And if I would have said, all right. Thank you so much for joining me. I mean, now it seems like a put on, like an act, but if I actually really did, you know, there is a way that you actually do slow down. You go for a walk and you relax, and do a little stretching and kind of sit down, maybe schedule it later in the evening. We tend to just slow down in the evening anyway. And then I would have been much more consumed and probably would have been talking slower and asking more questions and things like that. You can find the Chetan interview. It's the Frequencies podcast on YouTube. And I actually have it here as one of my links that I go to a lot. And I have the playlist, so I can just send it here. And yeah, I'm interviewing Eleanor Haspinall Porter this week, which I'm really excited about. I would love, or Eleanor Haspel Portner, I would love to interview you, Lasita, at some point if you ever want to be interviewed. Of course, I'd love to interview Genoa as well. But yeah, I just, I'm not a high consume person, so I don't do a lot of these interviews. It's actually easier for me to present or teach something than it is to do an interview. But I also really savor and enjoy them. And so when I do the interviews, I kind of want to do it with people I actually want to talk to and I actually enjoy and like, because my consume function is my sensing feeling. So it's much more connected to my feeling. I do frequencies interviews with people I want to talk to and am interested genuinely in what they have to say. Because that's a lower function for me, there's less people that I'm really interested in. So I kind of do it less in that way. But whereas when I blast, that's something that I can enjoy, but it's not really about enjoying. It's more about this is something I know how to do. It's like being a tour guide or something. It's like, yeah, I'll show you guys around. But because I have intuitive thinking blast, I'm showing you around a bunch of concepts and ideas and systems and how they fit in and stuff. So I used to be a tour guide. Very cool. Well, that's a pretty sensing thinking job. But see, sometimes people that have lower sensing thinking can also be really good tour guides because they can put a lot of magic in it and they can tell a lot of interesting. Oh yeah, on an organic farm. Okay, yeah, you're intuitive feeling. You're like, I used to be a tour guide. Oh, maybe you're a sensing thinking type of my organic farm. No, you're an intuitive feeler. I bet if you look at although I guess there's probably sensing feeling people that are into organic farming as well, but a lot of the organic movement and movements that are really future thinking and progressive in different ways and biodynamic and things like that are often intuitive because they're less about, well, they can be preserving tradition, but they're also about imagining different ways of doing things in the future. So I'm going to just catch up on a few of these comments. So Marissa talking about being blast last. Yeah, so whichever one is final for you, and then in your case, blast last and also NT blast last. So Marissa's least preferred thing is NT blast, which is what I'm doing right now. And so I think in order to do that, it's just a matter of slowing down. And I wouldn't tell Marissa to just be like we should all play to our strengths. We should also grow, but we can't just only go into our growth or only play to our strengths, right? One or the other. It's like that's the creative tension that's built into life. So if you're only being comfortable in your dominant lead way of being, that's going to be a problem. If you're being too hard on yourself, forcing yourself to blast too much, that'll be a problem. But what I found, so a few things. One is Mike is missing Blast, and yet he does Zeitgeist. But to keep it interesting, he really likes having other people be involved or keeping it fresh. I also know a teacher who's a college teacher who was rated highest of her whole school on Rate My Professor, and she's consume, play, sleep, missing blast. So very similar to your stack: play, consume, sleep, missing blast. And in her case, what people loved about her, and I saw it myself, was how good she was at facilitating kind of interactivity and just like they were so the students couldn't stand being blasted at. They were so bored being blasted at so much. I think Blast works more on like a Zoom format or something remote because we're just trying to transfer information by and large. But especially in person, being consume play and missing blast or play consume, that's also Johnny. That's everyone's favorite teacher. It's always everyone's favorite teacher because they're the teacher that is really interactive and gets everybody working together and talking and out of their shells and makes a lot of jokes and it's always fun and it's like they're not the one that you just show up and they just blast at you the whole time. So Ashley saying Blast being inferior for her is interesting because her new job as a hostess, the one part she hates is having to explain the menu. It's painful. So that would be the Blast because the Blast is having to, really, it's having to explain anything. You can tell someone's missing Blast because you have to twist their arm to get them to talk about it. Now, also, Ashley's Blast in particular is SF Blast. So it would be explaining what people like or explaining what's popular. So the least question you probably at least like getting is like what do people get around here, what do so or I mean it would probably be easier for you to say like the reasons why, like, so why is this cooked with that, you could probably talk more to that than that. But even just answering that, explaining anything, what I've heard from people who are missing blast is that they have a combination of being worried about saying the wrong thing, telling somebody the wrong thing, wanting to gather more information first, wanting to check before they do it. Like there's all these excuses for why they won't blast. And basically, the rule of thumb for if somebody has missing blast is you have to twist their arm to get them to explain something because they just don't. But then when they do explain it, they actually end up being quite good. Earlier today, Johnny, who's missing blast, and actually last week, see, it was funny. I was hoping Johnny would join me to do objective personality, but James caught him first. So for an hour and a half, because they both live here with me, James and Johnny talked about objective personality, and Johnny blasted for the whole hour and a half. Somehow James had caught him, and Johnny was like in his blast mode of wanting to explain it all, and he was able to explain it all, and he really. But see, then he was like blasted out, and he couldn't then come here and blast more. He was like, I'm done. No, there's no more blast. So yeah, so Marissa's way of explaining blasting is absolutely correct, and that is the technical definition. And so the inverted perceiving functions, I see them as living journals or inner sort of logs where we refer. It's kind of like an inner process manager that's like referring back to like kind of checking where we are now compared to where we were and where we're going. And it's basically doing this internal perception of a process using either sensing or judgment. So it can be either checking the steps, like what step are we on? I'm teaching and I have these steps that we're going to go take people through the steps, or making sure, in my case, making sure I've covered all the topics we were going to cover, making sure we've kind of covered all the ground we set out to at the beginning. It's really checking internally to make sure and then to perceive internally, like what impression do I get? If it's inverted sensing, it's going to be okay, this is what we did last time, or it's going to be like something that has to do with the past and practicing and rehearsing. If it's introverted intuition, which I have, it's going to be something I know because introverted intuition is the knowing function. So I'll be drawing conclusions based on my inner knowing. And then it plugs in on the external side to one of the interfacing functions, either extroverted thinking or extroverted feeling, which are really two ways of connecting to other people. And extroverted thinking also connects to systems and tends to interface with systems more. So because my blast goes through thinking, I tend to give people reasons. There's a reason why, we use N because the I is reserved for introvert. So N stands for intuitive. And here's the reason why. And I'm giving you reasons why people do things and kind of speaking in the world of reasons of thinking. And if I had extroverted feeling, even though I have introverted feeling, I'm keeping my feeling to myself. The extroverted feeling would be latching on to your feeling function and trying to connect with your values and to understand what you find important, and then to then kind of go from there. So blast with extroverted feeling can look very different because it can be more of a impassioned way, like even just the way people enunciate words. The extroverted feeling type might dramatize it a little bit to get an emotional reaction from others. For instance, the actor Bryan Cranston is an extroverted feeling type, and the way he might pronounce the exact same line as me, I would say, it was, it was like a rainy day, and I walked to the park and sat on the bench. And he would say it was a rainy day. And I walked to the park and sat on the bench, and like the rainy and the walked and the sat would be enunciated. Whereas for me, the day, the park, and the bench, because I'm just kind of a noun person, and I'm just like, it was rainy and I went to the park and or it was a day and this is what happened. And I'm just kind of in this much more, it's not like a dramatized way of expressing things. So that's what's so cool about it's really when you get deep into the advanced Jungian typology, you get to see that actually there's four versions of intuitive feeling. There's the blasting intuitive feelers and the sleeping intuitive feelers and the consuming and the playing. And actually it's almost like there's four versions of each of the things. There's four versions of blast. There's an intuitive thinking blast versus an intuitive feeling blast. And so you can get into these really interesting groupings where, like the grouping I was showing above, was like me, Mike, Johnny, all different animals. Johnny is play, so he's running around like crazy. I'm sleep, so I'm like off in my head. And Mike is consume, so he's noticing and asking a lot of questions. And yet, all three of us are intuitive feelings. So we're all working on the same project. And it's a very humanist project that makes us really care about humanist values like personal empowerment and betterment and all of these things. And so that's going to be what we as personalities come into life with. I mean, that's like what we've brought with us on the personality side. Now, if we don't have strategy and authority, we can really, through the not really knowing how to honor our life force energy, end up in all sorts of things that just aren't really important for us. Or I guess they were important for us, but they were only important for us to learn that they weren't really for us. It's like they were lessons that we learned, but we can end up in all these different places. And a lot of times that will be the place where we reach a dead end, where basically we've relied so heavily on our dominant function, on our dominant animal, on our dominant temperament, that we just reach a dead end. We've just ignored a whole other part of life. We've devalued it, we've mocked it and derided it and made fun of it and rejected it and said how unimportant it is and avoided it and pushed it away. And then finally it catches up with us. And a lot of times I think it is around the Chiron return. I think it can be before that for some people, at least the Saturn return. That's the first big wake up call of kind of, are you in the right place? Where I think that's when environment becomes really important with the Saturn return. You start to ask, am I on the right stage for this stage of life? You're meant to really be in the right stage at that time in your life. But I guess what I'm saying is by learning the personality typology systems, and I will have more materials available for people who are interested in digging into this. I'm doing kind of a bonus series on intro to Jungian typology and then advanced Jungian typology, which will go into the objective personality and some of the other approaches. And basically, this is not human design. It's not necessary for you for human design, but it can help you eliminate biases of what you might. And really, it just tells us we shouldn't really imagine what some of these personality is like from their body graph. We really don't need to imagine that. We can let them show us what they are doing with it, and we can be surprised because we've never seen a 3536 manifester that peaceful before, or we've never seen, or who knows what, right? There's going to be interesting assumptions that we make because we had a partner who had that channel, or we knew somebody of that profile. And those assumptions are dangerous. I mean, they get into the realm of prejudice, of typism, of basically people. I mean, there's people saying, I remember at an event last year, not an event I was involved with at all, but up in Salt Lake City, where someone said that generators shouldn't give human design readings. I mean, that's preposterous. Like, first of all, the personality is what is giving the outer authority, and the decision making is what happens according to the aura. But regardless of that, I think we just need to remember that we're more than a piece of paper. I mean, the human design body graph is incredible and it's magical, and we are so gifted to be given this X-ray into the mechanics of how it works. But Ra himself at one point exclaimed, it's a piece of paper. It's not you. It's like the personality is the passenger of this amazing form that we now have at this point in human history, the most profound almost three-dimensional model of we've ever seen. I mean, we have a model of the mechanics of the aura, how that works. It's a magical, it's an incredible, beautiful thing. It's still a personality that's a passenger inside of there, and two different personalities. One might be kicking and screaming against its strategy and authority. The other might surrender freely to its strategy and authority. And they're going to have very different trajectories in life. And of course, as Ra says, no choice. But Ra also said, no choice doesn't mean no chance. And so each of us has a chance to really live as ourselves and to follow that correct trajectory. And I don't think that human design needs personality typology, but I think that those of us that are in human design can learn about personality to really see what the personality is doing even, and what it prefers to do, how it has a very limited comfort zone and a place where it feels safe. And it has to kind of rush back to this comfort zone, which it's very quick at doing. And a big part of getting it out of its comfort zone is simply slowing down. It's kind of like if you're on a date with somebody and you just slow down and start to make eye contact and enjoy the silence together. It can be very uncomfortable, but then it can be exhilarating. It can be thrilling. Well, that's your cognition slowing down into the dispreferred areas that allow the unconscious to deliver more information that has been ignored. And I think a lot of what people coming into human design are coming in with is this profound sense that they've found something through their strategy and authority. They've learned, I mean, most people who get into human design are only really getting into it because strategy and authority speaks to them. Some people are curious and maybe they haven't gotten that part of it, but most people, something speaks to them and they go, wow, I've been initiating everything in my life. Or they're a manifester and they go, wow, I haven't trusted anyone to inform them. I really need to try this out. Most people, they're kind of coming in with this first kind of step of, what is it that, how different would my life be if I didn't worry what others thought and worry this and do that, if I really did just trust what my spleen told me or what my G center told me, or even the mental projector process of the outer authority and of basically environmental processes and of noticing over time and all of it, just the processes of deconditioning. And so that's kind of where people start with human design is, I'm interested in this process of like, how different would my life be if I actually surrendered to a decision-making process instead of taking personal responsibility for it? And I think that's really the beginning of the surrender of the personality, that the personality is then noticing, okay, I have this comfort zone. I have this place that I like to be. And in order to be in this very safe comfort zone, no matter what happens in my life, I'm always going to have, like, if you're um, an introverted intuitive like me and you tend to be more on the sleep side, well, you're going to be very comfortable with familiar things and very uncomfortable with chaos. Well, human design brings a lot of chaos into my life because my sacral response can respond to something that's very chaotic and that's bringing a whole lot of unplanned, unexpected things that I have to adapt to. If you're a lead extroverted, more action oriented type, like an extroverted sensing type or extroverted intuitive type, and you're more on the play side, you can be so triggered as a personality by long-term commitments, long-term relationships, long-term jobs, any of this stuff. Well, your human design, your strategy and authority will keep you in that if it's really right for you, if it is the right relationship, even if your personality is kicking and screaming as it learns to surrender, right? Because it's going to feel so uncomfortable going there. So I think what personality typology shows us is where our comfort zone is, where we get really uncomfortable, and then where we are really actually triggered into even breakdown states often, or crisis, which is really in the lowest or the most dispreferred, the fourth position, the inferior function, the missing or so-called demon animal. I guess there's two, but in any case, those dispreferred functions, animals, temperaments, and so, yeah, I mean, I hope this has been interesting for people. I know that this is a little bit out of left field from our normal human design content, which we'll be returning to next week, but I will have some videos that you can follow up on if you're interested in learning this system. And yeah, as far as being super fast and not liking slow, I think all of us are super fast at our dominant function and at our preferred temperament. So a feeling type is super fast to check how people feel about something or to check how they feel about it, to kind of check with their conscience or check with their internal yardstick. A thinking type is super quick to point out logical fallacies or problems or where something won't work or where there's a conflict. Um, each type is going to have a super like quick dominant way of just immediately applying that to anything that happens. And I think that's why it's so important for us to slow down. I mean, the slowing down is basically, it's magical. Of course, we can't just go around in a semi tranced out, dazed out kind of state all day long. I mean, at the same time, really allowing ourselves even to speak more slowly and to think more slowly and to process more slowly, it is a magical thing. It's like the personality is almost like the ability to be anxious and speed everything up because of the anxiety, or to surrender and allow it to unfold and play out, and to let go of that anxiety or to stop putting that pressure. There is something that the personality does. It's almost like it tenses or it relaxes. And so I do think part of what Ra talks about when he urges us to surrender and even the comfort of no choice is this kind of idea that the personality doesn't have anything to do, and it doesn't need to be in such a tense state of having figured out the right decision to make before it's even presented with the decision. You can wait and trust the biomechanical process of decision making in your form. Okay, so and then I see, Marissa says Dave and Shan call it chapter talking. I see. So that's maybe when you have lower blast is the kind of chapter talking like Johnny was doing earlier. He gave a whole chapter. He really explained objective personality super well, but then I wanted him to come and teach it today with everyone here, and he was kind of like, "Nope, he'd already done it." And then, so Marissa writes, she tends to consume talk where she's all over the place, jumping around the spectrum of details. The distance from point A to point B is not a straight line. Yeah. Um, okay, and then as far as yeah, projectors being the only ones to have readings. Well, projectors are here to guide, but it's not. It's I think readings can be initiating somebody into something. Like a manifester can really initiate them into it. A generator can do a lot of work with them and put a lot of. I mean, everyone. It's all about putting your life force energy into it and putting your outer authority into it. Those are the two things. So if somebody comes to me to a reading, I'm giving them my outer authority, which is like the same thing I'm giving you, but I'm also putting some life force energy into it, which is the labor that goes into the actual the on my part to be open to kind of reading into and feeling into the energies of their body graph. Well, okay, so I think so next week we'll return to human design. I do have a intro to Jungian typology series that'll be out first, and then an advanced Jungian typology. Then I'll be returning really to exclusively human design content for a while. I might do a couple other things just from popular demand. I mean, I my point mainly I really want to focus on human design. I just know that some of these things, to me at least, have helped clear up where I might have just made assumptions about just even people and the world and how people are and how the world works. Because so much of what we're doing is working with people and imagining how they work and what life is like for them, and witnessing it and experiencing it in all of its diversity. This can be a helpful layer, just as Enneagram can, because it can just help you see what's not in the body graph, and yet there are also interesting parallels. So that's my pitch. That's my reasoning for it. I've given my thank you, Lucita. I saw that. And yeah, I give my reasons because I have extroverted thinking. My blast is NT, so I'm giving you all my reasons for this. But yeah, I hope this has at least been interesting to you and considering your temperament stack. And of course, you can always post if you didn't have a chance to figure out the whole thing, or if you want to talk more about what it might mean, or if you're not sure of your temperament stack and want to figure it out. I'm always there to help people. So yes, thank you all, and I hope you all have a great evening. Next week we'll be back to our regular human design programming. But I appreciate you all, and I hope you had and some interesting thoughts. Okay, Take care.